the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Wednesday, August 26, 2015, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Kaahumanu Friday and another weekend. And it's my birthday weekend coming up on Saturday, and I'm years old. So I'm already out there, what am I going to do for my birthday celebration? Probably cry a lot, actually, is what I'm going to wind up really doing. All right, we've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room today. Got him confused. Ready to answer the phone when you call on in. Obviously, the big news, it's all over the corporate media. In fact, looking at Fox News, you'd think there wasn't anything else happening anywhere in the world other than the uptrend on the stock market, which just ended their business day. Over in Virginia, a disgruntled former employee of a TV station gunned down two of his former co-workers right on live TV, and shot and wounded a third person who was being interviewed over just tourism it was a fluff story. And it's getting a huge amount of coverage. Apparently the shooter, guy by the name of Lee Flanagan, also goes by the name Bryce Williams, drove off. Cops gave chase, car crashed, he shot himself, he lingered for a while, but he has now died, and everybody's out there thrashing around trying to figure out what is going on. What is coming out, though, is this guy, when he was working at the TV station, had anger issues, was always getting into arguments with everybody. Every time there was an argument or a disagreement, he was screaming, racism, racism, you whites are persecuting and keeping us blacks down. Apparently had bought into this whole propaganda campaign to try and remanufacture, the black victims of white racism that we've seen all over TV, and that may have been what pushed him over the edge. Not that he apparently needed a great deal of help on that. I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But needless to say, the gun grabbers are absolutely orgasmic. They've got another set of bloody shirts to wave around. The guns are bad. We've got to take the guns away. The guns are bad. And apparently the White House has already sent a message to Congress. It is time to act on gun control. To heck with the Second Amendment. And they're out there basically following this agenda that the right to keep and bear arms should be limited to those people who are working directly for the government. That, of course, is the model they followed in Nazi Germany, and look how well that worked out over there. And by the way, there's been another incident in Bakersfield where the cops shot a man they thought was holding a rifle, turned out to be a carjack. So I'm not all hot and bothered to have guns in the hands of these uniformed assassins who've been trained by Israel. And as a matter of fact, getting onto this issue about prescription psychiatric medication, which if this guy in Virginia wasn't on, he needed to be. But police are using antidepressants to a much higher degree than the general population. There was a study done down in Florida. Of course, gun bans never work. They never stop the crimes. And you have to realize, if only one of those TV news people had been carrying a concealed weapon, they might all still be alive right now. Oh, what am I saying? That's silly. The Bridgewater Plaza is a designated gun-free zone. And, of course, we all know that anybody who carries a gun into a gun-free zone just spontaneously combusts as soon as they pass that sign. So, obviously, we can't have people defending themselves against these crazies. And this guy was a crazy. I mean, it's being reported he was threatening his fellow employees, had anger issues. And by the way, I am pro-gun, but I absolutely agree with the idea. When you've got people with obvious, serious mental issues who are on these prescription psychiatric medications that have a long track record of triggering acts of extreme violence and suicide, yeah, maybe their guns ought to be locked up until they're a little bit calmer. And I want to know what medications this guy was on. Now, as far as Bryce Williams is concerned, the first reports were that he shot these two people, for making racist comments. And then it sort of gets into the twilight zone here because Bryce sent a fax. After he did the shooting, he sent a fax to the local ABC affiliate before he was actually apprehended. And in that fax, he said the reason for the shooting was he was suffering racial discrimination, sexual harassment, he was being bullied, said he was being attacked by black men and white females, he was being discriminated against because he was gay, along with being black. And then it really steps off the edge of the cliff. Because in this 23-page fax to ABC News, Bryce Williams wrote that the racism behind the Charleston church shooting, which we think was a false flag, is why he gunned down the WDBJ reporter Allison Parker and cameraman Adam Ward. And came on out there and said that God spoke to him after the Charleston shooting, telling him he had to act. And he applied for his gun permit and gun purchase just 2 days later. Now, the gun grabbers are going to blame the guns, and this is going to be fanned up for white versus black racism, although it's kind of hard because the shooter in this case was black. And they're going to say, well, he was justified because he was being discriminated against. And now we're going to get the gay community in there. Oh, yes, he was discriminated against because he was gay. And they're all going to be pounding their own particular political agenda. And with this case, everybody's going to get in there. The only people who are not going to be able to take advantage of this are going to be the Planned Parenthood people. They don't have a hook going into that situation. But everybody is out there pounding on this for their own political agenda. The gun grabbers are going crazy again, saying, we've got to take guns away from everybody. By the way, little note, the SRN story about how Walmart is no longer carrying the AR-15 in their stores, but they're switching more to shotguns and hunting weapons. And as the economy declines, that makes a lot of sense. Because more and more people who are living in the rural areas are going to be saying, I'm going to have to go out and put food on our table. As our whole infrastructure starts to shut down, I need to be able to go on out and bring back a deer, and you can't really do that with an AR-15. Military weapons are designed to wound, not necessarily kill, because if you shoot and kill an enemy soldier, the enemy forces have lost the use of only one person. But if you shoot and wound the enemy soldier, it's going to take 2 more people to take care of him. And in a war of attrition, that's more advisable. And that's why there are all these treaties limiting the size of military ammunition, full metal jacket. The idea is to wound as many of the enemy rather than kill them, because you're going to win your battle that way. So that's the reason for that. Hunting weapons are designed to knock down and kill next week's meals. And yeah, I think a lot of people are already, if they're out in the rural areas, they're already saying, yeah, we're going to have to go on out and hunt our food. And by the way, when Claire and I moved here to Hawaii all these years ago, there were wild feral chickens all over the place, part of the scenery. Very hard to see any of them these days. I think they've all been captured and put into various cooking pots all over the state. And we call it our chicken index of the local economic health, and right now it's not very good at all. All right, we're coming up on our commercial break. When we come on back, we're going to be talking about what's going on over in Ukraine, because unlike Fox News, we understand there's a lot of stuff going on internationally you need to be aware of. And we're going to be talking later in the show, new developments on the Hillary Clinton email scandal. If Hillary thought this shooting was going to get her off the hook, too bad, Hillary. No, we're still paying a lot of attention to what it is you've done and what the ramifications may be. We'll be back after these words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And one of our Russian listeners was mentioning in the chat room that in Russia, before you're allowed to buy a firearm, and citizens are allowed to have firearms, but you have to get a certificate from a mental health worker that you're not likely to do something really crazy with it, which I think is a really good idea, but it won't work in the United States because our medical psychiatric industrial complex has declared every normal human behavior a mental illness for which there is a very costly medication you should take. I mean, remember, these people actually declared the desire to eat safe and healthy food a mental illness. They called it orthorexia nervosa. So under the current American psychiatric industrial complex, nobody would ever get a clearance to own a firearm, because profits come before the Bill of Rights in the United States of America. We're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call. Steve in Massachusetts, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I just happened to turn on the TV, and they're talking about the stock market today, how it boosted up.
Yes.
And all of a sudden it's like, all that, what happened the past week, it's nothing. It's just like a little so-and-so that we had to go through, but they're saying, you know what, it's good time to raise the rates now. Definitely. They're saying, go for it. And it's just clueless.
We're still 1,000 points down on the Dow from where it was about a month ago, and we know that this is being rigged and manipulated for political purposes going into an election year, and also because all those financial institutions who are involved in the plunge protection team now have huge blocks of stocks on their balance sheets. And if there's a major correction, these companies are going to be instantly insolvent. And so they're going to do whatever it takes to keep the stock market looking good, however much instant money it takes created out of thin air, which increases inflationary pressures on us, because they don't really have a choice anymore. And the stock market is completely disconnected from the reality of the economy here in the United States of America. We're going to be talking about that a little bit later in the show.
Yeah, and I had a feeling that they're going to boost it up for a little while, and I still think everything's going to come crashing down in September.
At some point, something's going to break. I mean, they're caught between needing to prop up the stock market and not creating so much instant new created money out of thin air that the rest of the world drops the dollar internationally. So that's the bind they're in right now. And I don't envy them their jobs right now, because they got into a heck of a mess and they don't really know how to get out of it other than to start a real bloody global war as a distraction. And even when the stock market started dropping, what's the first thing that happened? Oh, it's China's fault. It's Russia's fault. It's everybody else's fault. We didn't do anything wrong. And, even today, it's the same thing. Well, it's all going to be okay. I personally think what we just saw this last week is a repeat of August of 1929, where a lot of people know about the big stock market crash of 1929 in October, but most people don't know that there was actually a bit of a major dip in August of that year. And it went down, and then it came back, and everybody breathed a deep sigh of relief and said, see, the market's stable, it's safe, everything's going to be just fine. And then, of course, October came along, and it all just imploded.
Yeah, it's kind of, it looks like it could be the exact same thing.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you, Michael.
All right, thank you very much for the phone call. Now, getting on to the war zones, emphasis on the plural, article out of Russia Insider is basically saying what's going on. The Ukraine peace agreement, the Minsk agreement, it's dead and rotting. Kiev has never complied with any of it. They're out there trying to get the eastern Ukrainian republics to put down their defenses, saying we've got a Minsk agreement, and yet Kiev continues to shell the eastern Ukrainian republics. They're hitting civilian targets. It's now come out that back last year during what was called the Ilovaisk encirclement, the forces of Kiev lost about 1,000 soldiers. It was a huge, huge military defeat, which has been under wraps until now. And Poroshenko's in trouble. The German media the other day was saying time has run out for Poroshenko. He has not carried out the orders of his Western masters to get a war with Russia going. His own people are saying they're sick and tired of the war. They want it to stop. Right now, polls are showing 2/3 of the Ukrainians do not approve of Poroshenko and what he's doing. There could be a very real public uprising in Ukraine to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler, at which point the U.S. will say, oh, humanitarian reasons, sanctity of national borders, and there'll be another punishment mission going into Ukraine, similar to what they've got going on in Libya and Yemen right now, because once you are enslaved to the U.S. empire, you don't dare leave or bad things will happen to you. Meanwhile, another article coming out of Global Research up in Canada, NATO is in the middle of this huge military buildup on Russia's doorstep. And it's obvious who is moving towards war, but the Western media propaganda continues to be, it's Russia's fault, it's Putin's fault, Russia's rattling their sabers, and we understand it's just another lie. all wars of conquest are started with lies by the rulers against their people. Because, let's face it, if a ruler stands up and says, you know, I think I'm going to invade this other country over here that hasn't actually done anything, but they got lots of stuff I want, like oil and gold and the rest of it, and I want all of you, the citizens of my country, to just help me go into this country and take all this good stuff that I really, really want. The people of the country would say, no, you're out of your mind. We're not going to do that. War is very dangerous, poorly paying, hard work. There's a good chance you're going to lose important bits of your body. And no, we're not going to go along. So anytime a ruler wants to start a war of conquest, they have to lie to their people to convince them the nation's in danger. We face a threat. There is no other possible option than we have to go and declare war on this country before they declare war on us. Preemptive war. That's become the new model. And the U.S. has waged preemptive war on, almost 20 nations now. Nations that never in any fantasy would have been a threat to the United States. And right now, the U.S. government is desperate for a full-on, bloody global war against military peers, so they've got something to blame the economic collapse on. It's not our fault. It's the Chinese. It's the Russians. You must believe us. And now we're in a war. You know, loyal Americans will just believe and act on what they're told. You know, don't pay attention to those doubters. They're aiding the enemies. They're aiding the terrorists. Pardon me. Now, there's a continuation of this propaganda to try and claim that Malaysian Airlines 17 was somehow Russia's fault. They're trying to brand Russia with this scarlet letter, and they're trying to maneuver Putin into some kind of a misstep where they can say, aha, this proves he did it. There's been a new development that has thrown a big monkey wrench into the gears of the propaganda machine. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. So we're talking about Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, and the constant propaganda has been Russian book surface-to-air missile killed Malaysian Airlines 17, and the statements coming out of the actual investigation keep getting rewritten, and the investigation has to reissue clarifications and saying, no, we didn't say this, and they've issued another one saying that, yes, in response to inquiries, maybe the plane was hit by a book surface-to-air missile, but there's no indications who owned it, whether it was Russia or Kiev, and now they're clarifying and saying, we can't state unequivocally it was a book surface-to-air missile. Could have been, but we are unable to rule out an air-to-air missile attack, which is consistent with some of the other stories that we have been getting. My personal theory about what happened to Malaysian Airlines Flight 17 is that Kiev tried to shoot down Vladimir Putin's presidential jet, which was coming back from his visit to South America, and it was in the same area at the same time. And like Air Force One, Putin's presidential jet is built into a civilian passenger jet frame, not as grandiose as Air Force One, of course. And the color scheme on that plane is very similar to the livery of Malaysian Airlines. At a distance, it would be very easy to mistake one for the other. I think that's what happened. We're going to take some phone calls now. Andrew in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind today?
Hey, Michael. I wanted to talk about Russia. But do you mind if I talk about David Duke? Okay. I mean, I've been hearing in the media what they said about David Duke. They're saying, oh, he's crazy, he's nuts, but, I had an open mind and decided to listen to him. And a lot of things he seems to be correct about.
Yeah, he does make a lot of sense. He's very logical. He's certainly very well educated. And, they keep trying to tarnish him with his brief tenure with the KKK, but that was 38 years ago. And they never mentioned things that Harry Truman, President Harry Truman, was a member of the KKK. Because at the time, the KKK was working to preserve our cultural identity. Now, some of the actions they did, obviously, we cannot agree with. Some of the nastier things the KKK is accused of were carried out by government infiltrators. that were trying to undermine and destroy them, like the FBI did to the civil rights movement in the 1960s as part of Operation COINTELPRO. But there were a lot of people, there was a lot of support for the KKK, and they'd become a political bloc that was a serious threat to the status quo, and that's why they had to be undermined and subverted and demonized. Now, that being said, Dr. Duke is like Donald Trump. He's out there saying this is what's really going on, and you may agree with me, and you may not, and that's your First Amendment right, but we're starting to see the emergence of a new class of commentator where we're not going to be politically correct. And we're not going to be cowed by allegations that anything that we say is offensive to somebody, because you can't tell the truth about what's going on in the world without somebody being offended by it, particularly those who are trying to hide behind lies. And so, it's kind of weird. The Alex Jones attack on him and deletion from Alex Jones' own website has had the opposite effect Alex intended. All of a sudden, Duke is getting a lot of attention. He's on CNN, and he's getting a lot of exposure right now. Now, one thing the media is trying to do is say David Duke endorses Donald Trump as another way to try and discredit Donald Trump. And Duke made it very clear on my show yesterday, and again when I was on his show earlier this morning. He doesn't endorse Trump. He's very much disagrees with him on a lot of areas, but he says Trump's value is he's talking about things that have to be talked about, like the immigration problem. And I think that's where we all get behind Donald Trump. He's not another glad-handing, politically correct, I'm going to say whatever my marketing people say that you want to hear. Trump and Duke and certainly myself, we're telling you what we know you need to know and understand in order to make good choices.
One thing I don't, certainly agree with David Duke, he makes this, to be, a purely, Zionist Jewish conspiracy, but it's not really that true. It's, more a globalist, but there's some Jews, but they're not really Jewish per se, but, there is a lot of non-Jews involved in those conspiracy. And
well, this is an area where Dr. Duke and I don't agree. There's certainly a heavy representation of Jewish people in some of the problematic areas of finance and media and government, but there's also a cadre around them of people who are not necessarily Jewish, but recognize that this is where the money and the power is, and if they want to share in that money and power, they're going to go along with the agenda.
Yeah. Did you hear about Donald Trump? For example, he was arguing with this journalist from Univision, O.J. Ramos, and they're demonizing him to be racist because he's against illegal immigration towards Hispanics.
Well, I mean, a lot of people have been jumping on that, and they're trying to say, you hate immigration, you hate Mexicans, you're being racist. No, we're opposed to illegal entry into our country, and it is our country. And the issue isn't that they're Mexican or Nicaraguan or Costa Rican. It is the fact that once they set foot over that border without the permission of our government, they have committed a crime. And they are bringing crime with them. They're bringing contagious diseases. And the politically correct people are saying, you can't talk about all these illegal immigrants who are killing people because, after all, we can't even call them illegal immigrants. They're undocumented workers. And, again, as Donald Trump says, and I agree with this, we don't have time to be politically correct anymore. Our nation doesn't have time to be politically correct. Political correctness is getting in the way of solving some very real problems that must be solved.
All right, thanks, Michael.
All right, thank you very much. We're going to switch over to Wally in Texas. Aloha, Wally. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, good afternoon, sir. I've got something that works out quite well for me. Just thought I'd put it out there. It works quite well for me. I have an AR-15 that shoots .45 caliber ACP.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that would work as a hunting weapon. That would work.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, I understand. But most AR-15s are sold chambered for the .223. And the .223 is a great anti-personnel weapon. It is pretty much ineffective against larger game. When you're trying to bring down, for example, a deer, don't try and aim for the heart. You're not going to hit it. You try and hit the scapula. to basically can't use that leg anymore, drives bone fragments into the lungs, brings the animal down very, very quickly. 223 doesn't have the energy to fracture the scapula that way. You do need something a little more potent. You know, the AR-15 frame is a good idea. I still have this partially completed gun. The 80% somebody sent me. I haven't gotten around to completing it, but I was thinking of chambering it for a larger round as well. But when you go to a gun store and you buy an AR-15, it's going to, unless you order special, it's going to be chambered for the 223. And that is
exactly
that's not a good hunting round. In fact, it's a very cool round because you're going to wound the animal. The animal's going to take off into the brush, and if you can't track it down, then that's unnecessarily cruel to the animal. You're not going to get your meal. The animal is suffering. It's a lose-lose situation. And I don't agree with anybody who says they can hunt with a 223. Unless they're hunting rabbits. Obviously, a 223 can take out a rabbit or something.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. But you can, what I like about it is you can go from a 22 caliber all the way to 9 millimeter. You can put 45 ACP. There's other, even AK-47 upper. You change to upper, use the 223 bomb.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, I have to let you go. Thank you for the information on the gun stuff, but we have to let you go for our commercial break, and we'll be right back with another phone call after these few words. Wow. Sorry about that. That was a goof on my end. Too many knobs to keep track of here. We're going to go right back to the phones here. Ron in New York. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Big fan. Hey, I see that the Hillary is really the scandal is really costing her, and they're looking to bring Al Gore out that dusted him off.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Now, I got a question.
Must be professional here. Must be objective, unbiased.
If Gore won that election the first time, I mean with W first term, do you think we would have went into Iraq? What are your thoughts on that?
I think it wouldn't have really mattered who won what election because the agenda to go into Iraq and all those other countries that General Wesley Clark blew the whistle on all the way back in 2003, that agenda was universally agreed to by everybody in the government, that they had to save the falling petrodollar by exerting control over all the oil nations on earth, either by kicking out their elected governments and installing puppet regimes that were going to do what the U.S. Told them to do. So there was never any question. It really didn't matter who we elected because everybody who was running had already been vetted as being in support of the wars. And again, look at our current lineup of candidates. They're all pretty much, almost all, there's a few exceptions, but they're all out there saying, yes, we've got to attack Iran, we've got to do this, we've got to do that, because that's how you deny the American people a choice in what's going on, is to say these are the only acceptable candidates, and you will vote for one of them, and it doesn't matter who you vote for. Israel still gets what they want, the corporations still get what they want, Wall Street gets what they want, and that's how the will of the people is simply bypassed in this country.
Wow. One question. I hate to get off topic from current events, but I was listening to what you said about wars, wars, the bankers' wars. Why now, after World War I, why weren't the Zionists given Palestine then? Because I was listening to Ben Friedman, and he said they turned against Germany and they got the U.S. involved because they thought they were going to get Palestine. I'm trying to figure out why they didn't get it.
Well, because there was actually there were actually people living in Palestine. At the time, it was a British protectorate, and Britain didn't want to just give it away because there was a lot of money to be made in that part of the world, primarily from transit fees. That's basically controlling the eastern end of the Mediterranean. And the British were still trying to hang on to what was left of their empire, and it was being whittled away by, upstarts like Gandhi down in India, and they didn't want to give up Palestine. So in the end, the founders of Israel had to come up with this huge propaganda hoax of, deliberate extermination of the Jewish people by the Nazis in order to get the world to say that what Hitler could not be allowed to do in Poland and France, go in and just take it over for their own use. The founders of Israel had to be allowed to go in and steal Palestine for themselves. And that's how Israel came into being. And that's why they're still defending that Holocaust hoax as viciously as they do to the present day, because the entire justification for taking Palestine away from the Palestinians and giving it to Israel is based on what appears to be a gigantic fraud.
Great. Thank you, Mike.
All right. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. Now, getting on back here. There has been additional evidence that has surfaced in Kiev that the so-called Kiev sniper massacre was a false flag, that Maidan was shooting their own people to blame on Ukraine's government to help drive it from power. This is how these things get done. And by the way, it looks like it's underway down in Beirut. You know, Israel's been trying to get into Lebanon. Lebanon is not towing the line of what Israel wants, and so there's huge protests and rallies there that is resulting in violence with the police. And the pattern is just too clear. That this is what the U.S. has been doing since the end of World War II. Quietly go into a country, identify the opposition, give them funding, supplies, and weapons, kick up protests, drive the elected legitimate government from power, and put in a dictatorship. And there's nothing new with that. They did it to Iran in 1953, Chile in 1973. That's how Saddam originally came to power in Iraq. They did it in Yemen 2 years ago. Didn't stick. Because the people of all these countries now understand that these revolutions that are changing their government are not really of the population. They're brought in from the outside for regime change, to bring these nations under proxy control of the United States for economic, political benefit. That's what's going on. Now, so far this year, since the start of 2015, Israeli authorities have carried out 370 demolitions of Palestinian property in occupied East Jerusalem and the West Bank, displacing 432 people, which doesn't sound like that many, but it's significant. This is coming out of the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Because and this gets into what Mike Huckabee is over there saying, oh, it's not really occupied territory. We should just accept this is all Israel. Remember, when Israel was created, they didn't have any part of Jerusalem. The United Nations has declared Jerusalem an international city to be shared among the world's major religions. And Israel is not supposed to have East Jerusalem. That's supposed to be the future home of a Palestinian government. Right now, Israel holds the world record for defiance of most UN resolutions. And they have never kept the conditions placed on their membership. Now, what really gets interesting, let me skip on down here because there's a link. Story out of Times of Israel talking about there is now a complaint in the courts of the United States that taxpayer dollars from the United States are subsidizing Jewish terrorism against Arabs. This was filed with the New York State Attorney General's office. And the allegations are coming out of Israel's Channel 10 about the work of the 13-year-old Israeli nonprofit Honomu, which provides financial support to Jews convicted of or on trial for violence against Palestinians, including the price tag attacks. And this is not what we send money to Israel for. In fact, there's another big stink being brought up by Congresswoman McCollum. Now, we've already mentioned that it is illegal for the United States government to take your money and send it to Israel while Israel has nuclear weapons but refuses to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty or allow IAEA inspections. That is United States law, the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and the Glenn Act. But there's another bill, the Leahy Act, which basically says the U.S. cannot provide military assistance to any foreign governments violating human rights, which, of course, Israel is doing. And so here we have a third law being violated by the United States government to please Almighty Israel. And just like the corporate media ignores the Symington Amendment and the Glenn Act, I'm not expecting them to pay any attention whatsoever to the Leahy Act, because Israel comes first. You know, we're just a vassal state of Israel, and you might as well get used to the idea. And it is a lot of nonsense. Now, getting on back here. As you know, American Airlines just canceled their flights going to Tel Aviv, particularly the Tel Aviv-Philadelphia route. And the airline is saying it was pure finances. It was losing money. You know, we're not making any money. Israel has now launched a diplomatic effort to get the U.S. government to force American Airlines to go back to flying that route, even if they're losing money, because this is not money. You're anti-Semite airlines. You hate the Jews, or you want Hitler to come back, and they want what they want. But American Airlines, and in fact any airline, is within their rights to cancel any air route that isn't making money, because that's what these airlines are in business to do, to make money. And Israel's just stamping its foot and throwing another tantrum. We got to take a break for our top of the hour news, and we'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And basically, it's been just about a year since the end of Israel's last punishment of the people of Gaza, and they're still living in ruins. Israel will not allow in materials to rebuild their homes, schools, hospitals. In fact, many of the Gaza hospitals are on the verge of having to shut down because they're simply out of necessary supplies. It's a starvation blockade. It is no different than what the Soviet Union tried to do to East Berlin. Remember the Berlin airlift? The Soviet Union cut off the road that connected East Berlin with East Germany. West Berlin. I got it backward. They cut off the highway that connected West Berlin with West Germany in order to starve the people of West Berlin into abandoning their own political system and accepting Soviet rule. And it didn't work because the entire world mounted this massive airlift to fly food and supplies into West Berlin until finally the Soviet Union just quit and gave up. We have exactly the same thing going on in Gaza. It's encircled. It's in a starvation blockade to force the people of Gaza to give up their own hope for their own independent government and accept Israeli rule. And the world sits idly by and does nothing. Those few heroic humanitarian workers trying to get through the blockade are attacked and sometimes murdered in cold blood by the Israelis. Now, over in Jordan, a member of their parliament is suggesting that Jordan should increase the number of soldiers they have on station to guard the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the Temple Mount by 200 because of all the activity that's been going on over there with Jewish settlers going in, trying to desecrate the mosque, trying to cause violence and trouble, because every time they do, the IDF guards are always on the side of the settlers. And because the Temple Mount is an international zone, declared such by the United Nations, Jordan and other nations have a right to have their own guards there to keep the peace. So that's building up. Now, over in Tehran, Iran, they're open for business. Every other nation involved in the P5+1 accepts it as a done deal. The sanctions are coming off. Good times are rolling. Britain just reopened their embassy in Tehran. And, of course, Netanyahu is seen as being bypassed by all these other nations going into Tehran and setting up deals. And he's still out to prove that he is in control of the Congress of the United States of America. He's going to kill this deal. And it's looking more and more like it's going to fail. And the problem is the damage has already been done. Because when this whole exercise in who's really in control of the U.S. Congress, Israel or the American people, gets done, however it resolves, it's going to be too late for American businesses. They're going to be going on over to Tehran, and the Iranians are going to say, should have been here 2 months ago. We had plenty of deals. We had plenty of contracts. They're all gone now. Sorry, there's nothing left for you. And Congress understands the harm they are causing American businesses, but they don't care, because their job is to serve Netanyahu and AIPAC and Israel, and every member of the House of Representatives is up for re-election next year. And we need to make a list of every one of those people who said, we're going to support Israel's agenda ahead of that of the American people and the president, and we need to give them their pink slips. 2016 could easily turn out to be the year where Friend of Israel is no longer seen as an election winner. In fact, it's going to be seen as a serious, serious liability. So they're still out there trying to kill the deal. Somehow, apparently, Sheldon Adelson is on board. He's telling everybody who's lining up for his campaign cash, you will kill the Iran deal. We must have war with Iran. We've got to smash Iran. That's what Israel wants. Therefore, that's what you want. And there are way too many politicians in our country who are willing to go along with that deal. They've got the money and the influence in the media. I'm going to do whatever they say. Mike Huckabee's over there in Israel raking in campaign contributions, ostensibly funneled through a couple of expat Israeli American citizens in order to get around the foreign campaign donations laws. But he's over there saying there's no occupied territories, it's part of Israel, whatever Netanyahu wants, that's what I'm going to do. On that recommendation alone, he should never be allowed anywhere near the White House. Now, yesterday we reported on the fact that Netanyahu, 3 times over the last couple of years, wanted to just go ahead and attack Iran's civilian nuclear power station, the way Israel destroyed Iraq's nuclear power station at Osirak, under the claim that they were building bombs in the basement. And by the way, when the rubble was examined, there was no clandestine nuclear weapon factory. It was just a power station. And Israel's now making the same claim about the Iranian nuclear power station, even though it was built by Russia, and Russia is saying, no, there's no bomb factory there. So apparently these 3 earlier plans to attack Iran failed the first 2 times because Israel's own military said, we're not sure we can pull this off. It's one thing for us to go into Lebanon or Syria and certainly Gaza and pound on somebody who can't fight back. Iran is a completely different deal. And then the third time, there were apparently some other political considerations that got in the way to where Netanyahu's cabinet pulled back and said, this is not the good time to do it. Well, apparently, Israel is very concerned about appearing weak. And so today, Israel has issued a statement from one of their security officials saying that the IDF is more ready than ever to strike Iran. We're ready to go. And of course, if they do, the whole world is going to know who's the cause of the problem, and it's not Iran. It's always Israel attacking other people, saying, they made us do it, Mommy. We were afraid they had a Death Star, so of course we had to go in and blow up their reactor and shower their civilian population with cancer-causing radiation. Global support for Israel is plunging. Support for Israel, even among Jews of other nations, is plunging, including here in the United States of America. Because all these people, they've got very comfortable lives, and they don't want anything to upset that. And they're looking at the actions of Israel's government as actually being the biggest threat to the safety and security of Jews in other nations. They don't want Netanyahu rocking the boat anymore. Now, as you know, Associated Press came out with a story a while back about how Iran was being allowed to inspect itself and how stupid that was, and that's why the P5+1 deal had to be killed. And as has been the case with so many of these claims, it turned out to be completely false. And so there was another story that came out over on warontherocks.com saying, well, AP just kind of got it wrong. It may have been shoddy reporting and a poor understanding of the IAEA. And that's not what happened at all. Associated Press relied on a document which turned out to be as bad a forgery as the document that claimed Iraq was buying yellow cake uranium from Niger. And AP didn't fact check. They were out there saying, oh, this helps Israel. This is working against the Iran deal. Therefore, we'll run it and give it the headline treatment. And they got burned by it. Now they're trying to pull back. Just simple just an accident, really. That's all it was. You know, we were bad. We're bad. We'll try to do better. And apparently Saudi Arabia has now reversed their position on the Iran deal. They now think it's a good idea. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And getting on back to this tragedy in Virginia where these two news crew, reporter and camera operator, were shot and killed by a man who is alternatively or claimed, he's now dead, the shooter is now dead, but in his manifesto that he faxed to ABC News, basically said he was discriminated against because he was black, he was discriminated against because he was gay. I'm a victim, I'm a victim, I'm a victim. The reason I'm not getting anywhere in life is you all hate me. And this idea of victimhood has really gone round the bend. I think this case illustrates that. We're now getting word that the shooter from this morning, Vester Lee Flanagan is his real name. He went by Bryce Williams when he worked at the TV station, and maybe he had something to hide in his past. And it turns out, yes, he did, because apparently 2 years ago, he tried to sue a different TV station down in Florida. Actually, not more than 2 years ago. Back in 2000, he tried to sue a TV station in North Florida for racism, claiming one of his bosses called him a monkey. And there's way too much of this going on. Remember, back in the 1990s, women were being encouraged to claim that men were trying to rape them, even when rape didn't occur. It was called empowerment, because you will get him thrown in jail and he will be out of your way on your climb to the executive suite. And Michael Crichton actually wrote about that in his book, Disclosure, which was made into a movie that really kind of skimmed out all the politically incorrect observations about how out of control this victimhood as empowerment was getting. And we've seen it's got out of control. All these fake hate crime hoaxes all over the place. Tawana Brawley was a very famous one. And this guy had bought into that mindset. I'm black, I'm gay, I'm discriminated against, I'm just going to scream and file lawsuits and complaints and all the rest of it, and, you know, they'll have to make me an executive just to shut me up. And that didn't work, because when you are accusing people of being racist or homophobic who are not really so, they are going to resent it, and they're not going to go along with the political correct program. Political correctness is very much, thankfully, on the wane in this country. All right, getting on down to Yemen, at least 40 have been killed as fighting spreads in central Yemen. And again, this has nothing to do with rebels or some such. 2 years ago, Obama was claiming that Yemen was a successful intervention. The U.S. had gone in, kicked out the legitimate government, put in a U.S. puppet, all will be well. Well, no, because here we are. The people of Yemen kicked out their U.S. puppet ruler. He's currently holed up over in Saudi Arabia, while Saudi Arabia wages this proxy collective punishment on the people of Yemen for daring to kick out their U.S. puppet ruler. And by the way, a reminder, collective punishment of a people is a war crime. But the people of Yemen are fighting back, and they rattled Saudi Arabia's cage, because apparently they fired a Scud missile toward the Jizan nuclear power station, and they got rather close to it. And so now Saudi Arabia is very, very nervous. All of a sudden, what do you mean they're shooting back at us? They're not allowed to do that. They're supposed to just roll over and surrender, because that's the rules we made up. Not really. Story coming out of antiwar.com, CENTCOM has, and this is true of all wars, truth is always the first casualty of every war, and CENTCOM apparently was caught skewing the intelligence of the war on ISIS, which we know is a fraud. It's a war on the countries we're using ISIS as an excuse to invade. But they were skewing it to be upbeat. We're getting success. Well, they have to report success against ISIS, even though they're not really at war against ISIS. So, of course, it's going to be part of the huge hoax. Now, anybody who thought that the situation in Pakistan and India was going to settle down has been dealt a disappointment, because Pakistan has announced it's pulling out of the talks that were scheduled to begin with India in New Delhi, saying that the rules set by India for the meeting were simply not acceptable. Now, we don't know what those rules were. May have been you come in and you just shut up and listen to what we tell you, and then you go home and do what we tell you. But apparently the initial conditions for the meeting were not acceptable whatsoever. All right, so let's talk about the economy. If you're following the news, the plunge protection team, today they got it right. They blew it yesterday. They pushed up the market way too early in the day, and then it plunged at the close. Today, they had an upshove at the open. It was going down, 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 down. Then just before the end of the day's trading, they shoved it back up again, and it got up to 619. Nobody is believing that this means the U.S. economy is improved. Nobody's even believing that the worth, the value of these stocks has increased. This is just more flat out market rigging, and everybody knows it. China is dumping their dollar reserves as fast as they can, and they're buying gold, just like Russia. You can see it in that dollar index. Everybody knows the crash of the U.S. dollar is coming. And again, Wall Street is in a bit of a bind. They can keep that stock market propped up as long as they keep creating new money out of thin air. And as you heard on the SRN Newsbreak, this talk about a rate hike coming next month, well, they're sort of pulling away from that. Because every time they talk a rate hike, the market gets hit. Because all of a sudden, all these Wall Street brokers don't have access to that free money they can use to game the system. They have to actually start thinking about making a profit to cover the interest payments, and that's when things really start to chill. Now, over at the Congressional Budget Office, they're finally admitting what we have been saying for years. The U.S. debt has become unsustainable, and it always was. Because under the private central banking system, debt always grows faster than the available money supply. It's designed that way, to hold a nation and its people in a permanent state of debt slavery, debt servitude, rule by compound interest. It's a system of enslavement and impoverishment. They've been running this scam for roughly 300 years, and I think it's time for it to go away. And there's another article over in the Corbett Report saying, remember, the central banks have created this mess because they create more debt than money with which to pay the debt. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here, and we're going to go ahead and grab a phone call. Jason in Maryland, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. It's good to talk to you. I'm driving, so I hope you can hear me. I was going to mention, I even placed it in my Facebook, that I'm up here in Annapolis, and they were recruiting in Facebook for actors for a big event the last part of August and or October or November. And the way I read that ad in the gigs section, it looked like they were recruiting for crisis actors. So I think, that's your might be your shooting down there in Virginia, because remember, they're going to recruit from an area where somebody's not going to be recognized by their employers or their buddies or enemies, but close enough they can put them up in a hotel.
Well,
so
it doesn't look like there were. It doesn't look like there were very many crisis actors around there. There were the two news people, the guest being interviewed, and the shooter. That's just 4 individuals. And when I first heard about the shooting, my first assumption, the safe, prudent one, was it's another staged event. But I don't think so, because the guy's facts, where he's out there screaming, "I'm a victim because I'm black. I'm a victim because I'm gay. God made me do it," and the rest of it, it makes him look like a total nut job. And normally when there's a staged false flag to serve an agenda, all of the supporting documentation will focus on that. I'm Muslim, praise be to Allah, whatever's going on. This whole thing, even the gun grabbers are not going to get traction of it. The guy was a nutcase. That's the issue, not the fact that he was able to get a gun. And so I know it is the safe assumption that these things are staged hoaxes because there have been so many of them. But in this case, I think we're dealing with a real shooting by somebody who was either taking way too many antidepressants or nowhere near enough. The guy's past history of just shouting discrimination anytime he didn't get what he wanted, I think it's simply not really useful. As a staged incident, it lacks the traction that you would expect to find in the surrounding information. So I'm tending to think that this was a real event. Again, I think all of this constant pounding of trying to convince the black population that they're victims of white racism, I think it triggered this guy off. And just like we saw in the 1990s feminist movement, where, they were telling women you're all victims of the patriarchy and you have the right to go on out and harm them any way you can, and it led to a flood of fake rape allegations, and a lot of innocent guys got put in jail, and it's the dark side of this politics of victimization. And while I think the Charleston church shooting was a staged hoax, it's rather ironic that this guy is claiming it's one of his reasons for having done what he did today. Okay?
Okay.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to let you go on out there. And, there are real shootings. It is a fact of life. But I think the question that needs to be answered here, what medications has this guy been on? Was he on antidepressants? And, of course, that is something we'll never be told, because that might harm the profitability of the pharmaceutical industry. Remember the Sandy Hook, whatever it was, hoax event? That one definitely was staged. And there was a public interest group that went into the government of Connecticut under their Freedom of Information laws and said, we want to know what medications Adam Lanza was on. And there was a hearing, and there was this guy, Patrick Quantier, who was the legal counsel for the state's medical examiner's office. And he came in and argued against releasing the information, saying that even if in this one case the prescription antidepressants triggered this behavior, that's not important for the public to know because it might discourage them from taking their prescribed mental health medications. Well, Patrick was wrong. It's not just this one case. There's a huge track record of these problems. But if you look at Connecticut's economy, it is heavily dependent on prescription pharmaceutical corporations. And the money overrules the public's right to know if what they're being prescribed by the doctors is bad for them. Everyone's out there talking about, the people killed by guns. Medical mistakes kill 400,000 Americans every year. Nobody wants to do anything about that because it's all big bucks. Now, getting on back to the economy, story out of governmentslaves.info. U.S. prosecutors are continuing to investigate at least 10 banks for gold and silver price manipulation, including Barclays, J.P. Morgan Chase, Deutsche Bank, and others, and basically manipulated prices of silver and gold. And they've been fined billions of dollars on this, but it is a reminder. All of these financial indicators are being manipulated for political purposes, for profit. They're hammering down silver and gold prices because those bullion depositories who played fast and loose with other people's gold are trying to get gold back to replace what they took and leased out, and they can't get it back. And they want to discourage people from cleaning out their savings accounts and their stock portfolios and buying silver and gold. In fact, you even heard the announcement they made yesterday during the market downturn. If you've got a 401k, don't think about liquidating your portfolio. Just ride it out. We'll make it all better in the end. And it's all about preserving the wealth of the people on Wall Street. And they're not concerned with how it might, in the long run, harm you. That's not how they think. And we just keep hearing all these institutions, all these major banks and Wall Street firms constantly under investigation, prosecution for fraud. They pay a wrist slap fine and it's back to business as usual. And ultimately, you pay for it all. Now, because the PPT got the stock market, got the Dow back up to 619, huzzah, huzzah, it's still more than 1,000 off the high just a month ago. But they're out there proclaiming the economy is doing great. Look at those, all that green on the stock market indicators. No, the economy's not doing good. Because of all the constant rigging and manipulation, the stock market has become completely disconnected from the economy. You want to know how the economy's really doing? Over in Los Angeles County, because of plunging employment and skyrocketing rental rates, 13,000 people are being made homeless every month in Los Angeles County. Every month. 33,000. This is a report released by the Economic Roundtable, nonprofit research group in Los Angeles. 13,000 new homeless people. After a few months, you're going to have enough angry homeless people on the streets of Los Angeles. They're going to get angry, and it's going to make the Rodney King riots or even the original Watts riots look like a minor inconvenience. Anybody who actually wants to start some kind of an upheaval in the United States of America, they've got a rich supply of recruits in all those homeless tent cities all across the country. Over in China, their media has declared that China is in an economic crisis. They're describing the inevitable, eventual impact like a nuclear explosion. The Chinese police have arrested the managing director, Zhu Gang, of China's #1 brokerage, CITIC Securities. This would be like somebody in the U.S. government arresting the management of Goldman Sachs. But you never see that here in the United States of America. Some low-level clerk gets tossed to the wolves. Oh, it was all his fault. He went rogue. He did bad things. The tops of these corporations, they're never touched. They're untouchable. They're treated like nobility and royalty. They're never going to be arrested. At least China is arresting their criminal bankers. So did Iceland. So did Iran. Only the U.S. has this feudalist attitude that we can't touch the nobility no matter what they do wrong. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, you know about all those Russian sanctions, right? There are sanctions against Russia, right? I don't know. I'm not sure. A lot of countries seem to be ignoring them. Story coming out of Fortress Blogspot. Apparently Japan has just said, well, the sanctions, that's the U.S. thing. We're going to go on out and we're going to do business. And apparently Japan is increasing their investment in the Russian Far East zone. They're having meetings with ministers for agriculture, forestry, and fisheries. And they're developing cooperation in transport, trade, investment, tourism, agriculture, and fishery. More and more, it is the United States that is being isolated by the sanctions, whether they're against Russia or Iran. But we're going to sanction them because they're all dependent on the dollar, and if we sanction them, they will bow to our will. No, they formed their own monetary union, BRICS, Shanghai Cooperative Organization. The days of U.S. dollar hegemony over the world are already gone, and the U.S. leadership and banking system is just refusing to recognize and deal with that reality. Now, over at the BBC, which stands for Brits Buggering Children, they're warning there's going to be massive layoffs. 32,000 people are going to be let go from the BBC, and I'm sure partly that's in response to a decline in viewership following the Jimmy Savile child molestation scandal, and also they lost one of their key flagship programs, Top Gear. Now they're bringing a Top Gear season back to the air with all new presenters. I don't think it's going to work. For the same reason that all the Top Gear franchises done in other countries like Australia and the U.S. didn't succeed. It was the presenters who made the show work. And the presenters of Top Gear, Jeremy Clarkson, James May, Richard Hammond, are now coming up with a new automobile show that is going to be on Amazon's streaming service. And somebody very graciously gave me a year's subscription to the Amazon streaming service, so we're going to be able to watch whatever they're going to call it. They can't call it Top Gear because that's owned by the production company. But it doesn't matter what they call it. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I think it's time that they came here to Hawaii, really. Now then. So, if Hillary Clinton thought the shooting at Virginia of those two news people were going to keep her safe from her email scandal, no, it's not going to work, and I even saw Fox News running another story about it. Apparently, some of the emails Hillary Clinton released had classified information from 3 different agencies. Now, under the rules, only the agency, only the institution that originally classified the information has the authority to declassify it. The Secretary of State and the State Department do not have the authority to accept classified information from, for example, the Central Intelligence Agency and say, we're removing the classification so we can send it out. And Hillary did that. In fact, there's a presidential executive order signed by President Obama, Executive Order 13526, that reiterates the authority to declassify a document rests with whoever originally classified it in the first place. Hillary Clinton was in violation of that. Another article coming out of the Federalist down Hillary Clinton's email rabbit hole, confirming that Hillary Clinton's released emails contain information that could have damaged U.S. national security if disclosed at the time they were written and sent to her. Story out of Rasmussen reports, polls are showing that almost half of American voters are saying Hillary Clinton should suspend her campaign at this point. Suspend it until all of the legal questions about her use of the server are resolved. And remember, this isn't just about the legality, although clearly laws have been violated here. Politics is perception. And as this goes on, the perception of Hillary is going downhill fast. And along with her, the U.S. Department of Justice, because we've got all these inspector generals who are looking at all of these various scandals, and every time they make a request to the Department of Justice for information they need to do their jobs, they get stalled. And now the IGs are demanding Congress step in and hopefully pass a law with a veto-proof majority saying the Department of Justice is not allowed to withhold this information, because it's a clear violation of the principle of oversight among the 3 branches. And that is why there are 3 branches, to keep watch on each other. They don't misbehave. Now, as you know, the indications are that Vice President Biden is going to jump into the 2016 presidential campaign. He's already got campaign offices in the early primary states, just hired himself a new spokeswoman. And we're hearing more and more from Hillary's top financial supporters that if Biden steps in, they're going to switch over. No more checks to Hillary. She's going to have to live off of her charitable foundation. But this story that came out of the Washington Post, no less, is saying there are a dozen top Democratic fundraisers ready to dump Hillary and go over to Joe Biden. And I notice Hillary's people are trying to regurgitate that old thing about Joe Biden, the creepy uncle, because he inappropriately touches people. And I'm not a big fan of Joe Biden, okay? But I'll take him over Hillary anytime. I do not want Hillary in that Oval Office. I don't. And Hillary's people are making a real big deal out of the revelation that Joe Biden's son Robert Hunter Biden, his name has been found on the Ashley Madison data dump from the hackers. And Robert Biden is denying it's him, and he's pointing out that the birth date on the account is off by 10 years. Well, everybody lies about their age on dating websites. I mean, come on, let's get realistic about that. And his profile on Ashley Madison has him as 10 years younger than he really is, but apparently there are credit card records supporting that it really was him. A little bit of a minor embarrassment, and of course, nothing to do with the father. But Hillary's people are trying to make a big deal about that as well. All of a sudden, Biden has become Hillary's #1 enemy. So, Joe, stay out of small airplanes and suburban Washington, D.C. parks. Just a little piece of friendly advice. Trust me on this one. I know. Now, getting on over to Donald Trump. He is still being attacked over his issues for illegal immigration and his idea of ending birthright citizenship. And as legal scholars and historians look more and more closely at the 14th Amendment, they're beginning to realize that its original intent has been distorted over time by the pro-immigration, let's flood America with cheap labor party. And that in point of fact, it is very clear in the supporting documentation for the 14th Amendment that it was not supposed to provide citizenship to children born of foreign nationals inside the United States of America, who are, under international law, still under the jurisdiction of the government of the parents. Now, they're beginning to look at the numbers on Trump's plan. Everybody's been screaming about, oh, it's going to cost a fortune to deport all these people back to where they came from. Really, we're better off leaving them where they are. But the numbers actually work out that after the deportation is carried out, there will be a savings of $100 billion a year that is not being spent to house and provide services and food and medical support and transportation to all these illegal immigrants. We're going to come out money ahead if we get the illegals out. And again, this is not racism, and this is not even being anti-immigration. I don't have a problem with anybody who wants to come to the United States of America. There is a prescribed legal process to follow to be a U.S. citizen. And if you come through that, congratulations. Welcome to the United States of America. I hope you're not horribly disappointed about the reality of what this country is versus the propaganda, but welcome anyway. It's an issue of illegal behavior. It should not be encouraged, tolerated, or condoned. We'll be right back after the news. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Now, a member at WhatReallyHappened.com just put up an interesting article from GovernmentSlaves.com, and they're talking about a new James O'Keefe undercover video that has shown that Hillary Clinton's comments to Time magazine about their Get Out the Vote program was another fraud, because the Clinton campaign officially maintains its policy is to register all voters regardless of their preference in candidates. Yet on this video, Hillary organizer Sarah Sterner is caught telling staffers to ask voters, are you a Hillary supporter? If they are, register them. Otherwise, then, move on. And again, this is going to come back to haunt Hillary, and I do not want that lady anywhere near the White House. Now then, getting on over back to Donald Trump, as you know, he is leading all the corporate media polls by a huge margin. When you go out to the polls on the independent media, his gap is even larger. Everybody's running polls right now. We ran one here. Donald Trump was, way out and ahead. Same thing over at Natural News. And what we're seeing here is this huge rejection of all the establishment candidates. The American people are waking up and realizing that the pre-packaged, preordained, pre-vetted, pre-approved lineup of candidates are nothing but another bunch of puppets that are going to lead the nation into disaster for the benefit of a fast buck for the bankers, which is what it's all about. Now, apparently, Trump is doing well enough that the Council on Foreign Relations, the Bilderberg people, the Trilateral Commission, they're starting to pay attention to him. Yeah, up until now, oh, he's a joke, he won't last, he's whatever. Now they're paying attention. Even MSNBC is saying he could actually pull this off, unless he's assassinated, which is also a possibility. If they can't do the Ron Paul method on him, they'll go back to the Robert Kennedy method to get him out of the race. But they're having to take him seriously. And even if you don't agree with him 100%, and I don't, he is this breath of fresh air. Because he says what he really thinks, not what his managers tell him you want to hear. We've had enough of that. Every campaign, the candidates will tell us what they think we want to hear to get our votes, and then they'll go off and do what they're going to do. With Trump, whatever he says, if you don't like it, it probably represents his real opinion and what he's really going to do. And that's a better deal for us than another one of these manufactured candidates that we've been getting all this time. I remember back about the time of Nixon, there was this wonderful series of books, The Selling of the President, and it came out every election. So there was The Selling of the President, 19 blah blah, whatever the election year was. Now, over in Great Britain, things are heating up for phony Tony Blair, because the Chilcot inquiry is really starting to dig at the situation. The people of Great Britain are very angry that they got suckered into this invasion and conquest of Iraq on the basis of absolute lies and deceptions. And they're angry about it. They're angry about what they had to pay for that war in taxes. They're angry about their kids who went off and came back crippled or didn't come back at all. And they're angry, and they ought to be. And so should Americans. And there's this article over in Sputnik News about the net widens, because the Chilcot inquiry is now starting to say U.S. President George Bush was part of this. We have to look at both these men. What did they do and when? And if you will remember, the Downing Street memo, which got leaked out, tells us what happened. Bush and Blair had already made the decision to go to war in Iraq and conquer it. And they fixed the propaganda around that. They came up with this cock and bull story about nuclear weapons to trick us into throwing the lives of our children into their little meat grinder. That's what happened. It's time to acknowledge we got lied into that war. We've been lied into virtually every war. Torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, Spanish mine in Havana Harbor. Oh, trust us, the Lusitania wasn't carrying weapons. How many times do you have to be lied into a war before you realize that's what they're doing? And they're doing it again in Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Libya, Iran. They'll do it in Russia and China. All war is based on deception. That's right from The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And they're doing it again. Now, the British media and the British government, and indeed the Chilcot inquiry itself, have been expressing a great deal of concern over the fact that the U.S. government continues to refuse to share documents with the Chilcot inquiry. And there's a bizarre statement that came out. The observation that the U.S. is withholding these documents requested by the Chilcot inquiry as they may discourage future wars the U.S. is interested in, which is a very polite way of saying that if it is confirmed even officially, what we all know, we were lied into that war, it's going to be harder for the U.S. to lie you into a future war. Yeah. Fool me once, and so forth and so on. And in the background of all of this is this ongoing scandal into this pedophilia, child molestation. It began with Jimmy Savile at BBC. It's grown to encompass members of Parliament, members of the royal family. It's just all over the place. Former Conservative Member of Parliament Harvey Proctor is out there saying, this is just a homophobic witch hunt. None of this molestation and went on. They just want to get the gays. So again, they're playing the victimhood thing. There's nothing there. They just hate the gays, and that's what this is all about. It's amazing. Now, up in North Dakota, their state has just legalized the use of weaponized drones for police use. Now, the bill stops short of lethal force, but the drones can be armed with tasers, which we know do kill people, rubber bullets, and tear gas. The drones they're using are already set up to be armed with an aerial shotgun. And I'm sure James Cameron is jumping up and down saying, see, I told you in the Terminator movies this was coming. And he was absolutely right. Now, a lot of people are continuing to complain about the new Defense Department guidelines for war, many of them clear and obvious violations of international law and treaty. And under the new Law of War Manual, journalists can be held by the military as unprivileged belligerents, which is a fancy term meaning we can arrest you, but you are not covered by the Geneva Conventions. And basically they're saying journalists are civilians, but anybody the military deems as reporting in a way that is not supportive of the U.S. can be deemed an unprivileged belligerent, can even be detained. And that means if you're telling the truth about America's drone strikes on these countries, you can be deemed one of these enemies and taken into custody. So much for the First Amendment. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, in the wake of this morning's horrible tragedy in which this obviously deranged individual shot and killed two newsmen and wounded seriously a third person before killing himself, the gun grabbers are out there in full tirade. Ban the guns, ban the guns, ban the guns. The White House has sent a message to Congress. Now's the time to toss out the Second Amendment and disarm all of America. And that stands in contrast to this very bizarre story that was reported over an Investment Watch blog involving a case before the U.S. Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals. And basically, they ruled the Second Amendment also covers the illegal immigrants, that if they sneak into the country, they too have a right to keep and bear arms. And the Seventh Circuit panel said that the term the people in the Second Amendment applies to anybody who's inside our borders. I would disagree with that, because if you go to the top of the Constitution, to the preamble where it says, we the people, it means the people who are the country itself, the American people, the citizens of the United States of America. And so we're looking at this bias toward the illegal immigrants where they're trying to take the guns away from the law-abiding legal American citizens. At the same time, they're saying that all these illegal immigrants have a Second Amendment right to keep and bear arms, including these members of the MS-13 gang, all these members of the drug cartels who are bringing the drugs into the country. And Donald Trump is right. These other countries are making fools of the United States of America because they're taking this open border policy as an invitation to dump all of their undesirables into our country. And it's not without precedent. When the U.S. opened its borders to Cuban refugees, Castro went down to the Cuban prisons, took all those people, put them on boats, and said 90 miles that way. And Florida has paid the price in an epic increase in crime ever since. And it's happening all over again. But it's not politically correct to talk about the link between illegal immigrants, who are, of course, criminals the instant they set foot over that border, and the increase in crime in the United States. It's not politically correct to talk about the illegal immigrants and all of a sudden the reappearance in America of contagious diseases we thought had been eradicated 20 years ago. It's not politically correct to call them illegal immigrants. We'll call them undocumented workers. Political correctness can go jump in the lake. I've had it with political correctness. Political correctness is just another name for newspeak from George Orwell's 1984. That if we take away certain words, you will not be able to think certain thoughts. That's what it is. Political correctness is the real-world implementation of newspeak. Enough is enough is enough. This idea that illegal immigrants have a right to keep and bear arms. The Constitution and the Bill of Rights is supposed to apply to legal American citizens. From the point of view of the federal government, it doesn't anymore. They've been carving away our Second Amendment rights, our First Amendment rights, our Fourth Amendment rights. Boy, talk about Windows 10. But we have to take care of those illegal immigrants who are coming into this nation believing that there's a Bill of Rights. It really is nauseating to look at. Now, we have seen the corporate media try and bash conspiracy theorists. There are scientists being funded to prove that people who believe in conspiracy theories are mentally ill, socially unfit. How can anybody not trust the corporate media and the government? Well, that's going to blow up in their face a little bit, because now Barack Obama has his conspiracy theory he's putting out there. Okay? The White House is now claiming that all of those Planned Parenthood videos about carving up prematurely born babies and selling them for parts, they're all fake. They're all, man, you shouldn't believe them at all. Planned Parenthood is good and the pro-lifers are bad. And so now even Obama is resorting to conspiracy theory. You know, they're all fakes. Planned Parenthood has already acknowledged the videos are real and just saying they're taken out of context. But no. The new operant talking point, they're all fakes. They were made in a Hollywood movie studio, the same one where they faked the Apollo moon landings and all the rest of that. Okay, over in the Caribbean, newly formed tropical storm Erica approaches at a fast pace. The Leeward Islands have issued a tropical storm watch, and that's something I've been noticing both in the Atlantic and here in the Pacific. We're in a strange state of weather where storms are just really kind of popping up very, very quickly. And we have had a lot of near misses of hurricanes so far this hurricane season here in Hawaii. It's a record setter. And we've got another one aimed at us, Tropical Storm Ignacio. The predicted track is straight as a rifle shot and aimed right at the Big Island. Going to be getting here about next Monday, next Tuesday, someplace in there. Now, if Ignacio goes over that southern lava field, it'll tear itself apart, because we've seen that happen before. But it is amazing how many we're getting. Now, the global warming people are out there saying, see, this proves the world is warming because heat creates storm. No, that's one of their big lies. What creates a storm is a temperature differential between the surface and the upper atmosphere. And you can get violent storms by upper atmosphere cooling as well as surface warming. And the proof of that is in the outer gas giant planets of the solar system that have hurricanes the size of our entire world at temperatures hundreds of degrees below zero. But it is very interesting. The historical pattern has been that when they have a severe hurricane season in the Atlantic, it's calm here in the Pacific. And when they have a very light hurricane season in the Atlantic, which they've been having, we get a lot of them out here in the Pacific. It bounces back and forth. Nobody really understands why. So we're coming up here on another commercial break. When we come on back, new developments in the world of mandatory vaccines, GMO, attacks on gardeners, fracking, quakes, a lot of stuff going on, and another scandal from the world of carbon trading. We're going to be talking about that a little bit. So, and of course, we're going to be talking about Windows 10 and Microsoft spyware and all that entails. So, When we come on back, we're talking about that. And apparently, believe it or not, the food you're served at airports is being tailored to make you a more happy traveler. To get the TSA off the hook, I guess. Not going to work. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, as you know, out in California, they've passed a law requiring all school children to get a whole series of vaccinations, whether they need them or not. Parents are not allowed to exempt their children out of their religious beliefs or out of their concern that many of these vaccinations seem to cause a lot more harm than good. You have no choice. Your child actually belongs to the state, and the state will decide what they're going to eat, what medicines they're going to take, and just sit down and shut up and crank out more workers and soldiers for us. That is your job in the United States of America. Now, California is also considering a new law mandating a vaccine schedule for adults. The Centers for Disease Control has come out with what they're calling the adult vaccination schedule. They're not happy enough with having 40-some-odd vaccines your child is required to have. Now they want to have another list for adults because money is pouring on in. And a lot of this is absurd because they're recommending the measles and mumps vaccine for adults. A lot of adults, I'm one of them, we've had the measles and the mumps. We're already immune. We don't need that shot. Yes, you need the shot. We need the money, stick, jab, needle, so forth and so on. So now there is an agenda being pushed by the National Vaccine Advisory Committee saying that it is time for a nationwide mandatory vaccine program for adults based on the adult vaccination schedule approved by the Centers for Disease Control. And remember, the Centers for Disease Control is not a government agency. It's a private, for-profit corporation financially tied in with all of these big pharmaceutical corporations. They put out a public image of being concerned for the general public health. That's not what they do. And remember, the CDC is dealing with their own scandal. That one of the authors of the CDC's own study claiming to show there was no link between vaccines and autism blew the whistle saying the study was a complete fraud. They cherry-picked the data to come to the result they wanted. Vaccines are safe and effective. You will buy, you will use. Give us your money. Now, not too surprisingly, and we predicted this was going to happen, out in California, the public school system is reporting a huge surge of parents who are choosing to homeschool their children in order to avoid the mandatory vaccines. And, of course, as the public schools have less and less students, they get less and less money. They're in a panic. They're now lobbying the California legislature, rented lips, to pass another law outlawing homeschooling. And this is another indication of how government's attitude appears to be that they own the children. You as the parents don't own your child. You have no authority or control over your child. We will raise them in loco parentis. We will decide what they eat, what medicines they will take. And you have nothing to say about it. These children are all going to be tattooed property of the United States government. That's where this is headed. Now, meanwhile, in saner parts of planet Earth, the European Medicines Agency has opened a probe into the HPV vaccination program because of the thousands and thousands of reports of young girls given this vaccine becoming seriously and permanently ill. And this European Medicines Agency, that's the European Union's version of the FDA, only apparently a lot more honest and above board. And they're looking at Gardasil and Cervarix. And they're saying there appears to be a serious problem here. Now, Brandy Vaughn, she's a former Merck employee. She was a sales rep for Merck. And when she found out that Merck was concealing data on the harm of the vaccines she had been selling, she quit. And she has become a vaccine choice advocate. And that's really what's going on here. All we're saying is people should have a choice. If you want to believe those glitzy TV commercials and all the sales brochures and you want to get jabbed, go ahead, fine, we wish you luck. But if we have any inalienable rights, it has to include a right over our own body, what we put into it, what we refuse to allow to be put into it. And we got to make that part of the blueprint for the new America. That has to be on the Bill of Rights. Your body is your property, and you have the final say over it, and your children. And Brandy is reporting that she is now the subject of a clear campaign of harassment and intimidation. And we have been hearing reports from all these doctors who are questioning the safety of vaccines that they appear to be targeted by an organized smear team, a hit squad, working for big pharmaceutical corporations, because vaccines are big business. We're talking $30-40 billion a year. And they want to protect that huge revenue stream. They want to grow it. That's the new business model of big pharmaceutical corporations. They don't want to bother making medicines for sick people. The sick people will stay sick or they'll die, and there's all kinds of lawsuits. No, the new model is selling medicine to perfectly healthy people who do not need it. It's operating on the same moral and ethical level as the traveling Wild West medicine show. They're selling snake oil. Genetically modified snakes, apparently, at this point here. Now, Germany has decided they're going to join the large list of nations who are banning GMO crops. It's now something like 65, 66. And Germany is now the latest country in the European Union to say, we do not want genetically modified crop cultivation in the country. We do not want any products crossing our borders with GMO content. They're going to be mandating that anything imported into their country have GMO labels on it. Here in the United States, Congress is in the middle of passing a law that will outlaw GMO labeling and outlaw banning GMO crops. To bypass the will of the voters, like down here on Maui, they put a public referendum on the last ballot. We do not want GMO on our very delicate ecology on this island. Monsanto found a sympathetic judge, one who could be bribed or coerced or blackmailed, to put a temporary injunction against implementation of the GMO ban, saying they're going to have to wait for Hawaii's legislature to look at it, which is not going to meet till next year. And if Congress passes this bill, and they will, it makes the whole point moot. You're not allowed to know if what you're eating has had altered DNA in it. And, of course, the GMO industry says, well, look, if you cook the food properly, you don't have to worry about altered DNA. That's partly true. First of all, a lot of people eat stuff that isn't cooked. In salads, fruits, you don't cook them. But the real danger of GMO is not the altered DNA itself. It's the altered protein expression caused by the DNA that's been engineered. And this causes all kinds of unexpected, unpredictable, unlooked for side effects. And a good example of that would be the Roundup Ready corn, which it was discovered after it had already been planted. An unexpected side effect is the stalk of these corn plants is much tougher than the natural variety. And farmers had to buy Kevlar-belted tires for their tractors to prevent punctures. And if there's one unexpected side effect, there are going to be others. Some may not be immediately visible. Some of them could take years to manifest themselves. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be back with the last segment of our program after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're going to go ahead and take one more phone call. John in New Jersey. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Thank you, Michael. I had the pleasure of going to Molokai, the island of Molokai,
yes,
with my parents. They went there for the 25th anniversary 25 years ago, and we went for the 50th anniversary just this past New Year, whatever. I want to know, because I spoke, and we went to the organic farms, and I even have the name here. It's called Kuma Farms. We went there, and I spoke with the people there, and they loved the organic stuff. But when I rode down the street from the airport, there was a Monsanto plant there, which had a couple bullet holes, whatever. But what I want to know is, when you were talking about the other day, you were talking about that the judge overturned it. Who appointed that judge? That's all I got to know, and I'll get off the air now.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I don't actually know. I haven't dug as deep into the local politics as I ought to, because it's already being preempted by this bill that's going through the U.S. Congress. But the judge didn't overturn the results of the election. The judge didn't have that authority. The judge issued an injunction against the implementation of that law, saying that, yes, this is the will of the voters, but we can't let it move forward until information is provided and lawsuits are settled in the legislature. And it's basically stalling out while Monsanto went to Washington, D.C. and bought the Congress to pass this law saying there's a ban on all GMO labeling, and there's, moreover, a ban on trying to ban GMO in your backyard. So we can feed you whatever we want. We can plant and grow it wherever we want. And we know this stuff is very dangerous. GMO, genetic engineering, is the most dangerous technology humans have ever fiddled with. It's far more dangerous than nuclear technology. If you have a meltdown, you cover it over and you kind of hope it goes away. If you make a dangerous gene and it breaks into the wild, it's going to be everywhere. What happens if that epicite gene, which sterilizes humans who eat that corn, if that breaks in and contaminates corn all over the world? You're looking at an extinction level event. Now, a lot of people who talk about whether there's intelligent life on other worlds, they're always saying, well, why aren't they here? And my favorite explanation is, why would they bother? What do we have that's of interest to a civilization able to travel from one star to the next? But there may be another explanation, and it may be that every intelligent civilization reaches a crisis point where they develop the technology to start tinkering with the code of their own biology, and they make a mistake and they destroy themselves. And that could very easily happen because GMO technology is just being handled very, very recklessly. They're putting out products, they're making money, they're politicking their way past all opposition, and we know there are unanticipated side effects. They're not being looked for. Nobody can predict them. They don't care. They put together a GMO monstrosity, and they say, is it producing the product we want to sell? Yes, it is. Get it out to the marketplace. And it is very, very dangerous. There are no safeguards on a technology that could, in the event of a mistake, literally wipe out all life on Earth, or certainly all human life on Earth. Now, the goal for Monsanto in all of this is to basically rid the world of all natural occurring food crops, to make the world dependent on having to come to the GMO companies for the seeds to grow next year's food. They're trying to do with food what the U.S. did with the U.S. dollar. Make the world dependent on us in order to perpetuate our rule and plunder of the rest of the planet. That's it. That's the real goal. That's why we've seen all these courts always side with the GMO companies, even with this ridiculous idea that a farmer who's growing natural organic crops and he discovers his field has become contaminated with GMO, the farmer gets sued for violation of Monsanto's intellectual property rights and loses his farm, even though he didn't want the GMO technology, didn't want it at all. And this idea that Monsanto says, well, if you have a 10-foot border safety zone around the farm, everything's fine. No, it isn't. Remember when that wheat crop got contaminated with GMO pollen from an unapproved experimental wheat crop several states away? This stuff cannot be contained. One of the reasons Monsanto is out here in Hawaii is they understand the potential for a mistake, and they're growing all their experimental stuff out here. And the idea is, well, if we make a mistake and we absolutely destroy the state of Hawaii's agriculture, well, it's just Hawaii and it's in the middle of the Pacific. The rest of the world would be safe. Gee, thanks a lot for caring about the Hawaiian people, Monsanto. But it is, at least when nuclear technology came along, there was a respect for its potential for harm. And there was a certain degree of care. Initially, it got rather lax when they started building the Fukushima nuclear power plant. But the GMO, there's absolutely no restriction on it, no safeguards. And every time there's evidence of harm from the GMO, glyphosate, Monsanto simply lobbies to have the publication banned or shut down or silenced. They're all about the money and control of the global food supply, and they absolutely do not care if ordinary people are suffering harm from these products. They just don't. We're just there to sell things to and make money from, and that's all that matters. If the GMO makes us sick, well, that'll stimulate the economy because we'll have to go to the hospital and buy medication to treat the symptoms. And it is an out-of-control situation, tremendously. Now then, up in Canada, CBC News has confirmed, or was reporting, that British Columbia's Oil and Gas Commission has confirmed the cause of an earthquake last year, 4.4 magnitude, not all that bad for those of you who live in Southern California, but a bit of a surprise to the people in British Columbia. They have confirmed that this quake was caused by fracking. They've even narrowed it down to which fracking well caused it and which company was behind it. And you're not going to hear that reported in the American corporate media either. Now then, a big part of the payoff for Al Gore's global warming hoax was he wanted to become the world's first carbon billionaire by coming up with the idea of a carbon credit. And he was assisted in developing this system by Enron's Ken Lay in order to defraud planet Earth with carbon dioxide the way Enron had defrauded California with electricity. And the frauds are going on because there's a big stink that has come out where factories in Russia deliberately increased their production of carbon in order to then turn around, pull it back, and claim millions of dollars in carbon credits. Just a gigantic fraud. It's all fraud. Meanwhile, Obama's on his way to Las Vegas to talk about global warming, and Air Force One is going to burn up 35,000 gallons of fuel and pour those greenhouse gases into the air. Same thing with Hillary Clinton. She's out there talking about the evils of global warming, and she's flying around on her private campaign jet. Okay, there's a big stink going on here now. This is over in the New American, where apparently Microsoft, not happy with having turned owners of Windows 10 computers into spy machines on law-abiding Americans, they are now putting out patches to Windows 7 and 8 to back-propagate that spyware technology to people who are refusing to go to Windows 10 because of its privacy violations. And, yeah, it's ugly. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow. Right now, there's the music. It's time for Claire and I to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Share what you know with who you know. Please keep calling your local talk radio stations to carry the GCN programming. Direct them to gcnlive.com or wrhradio.com. Thanks to those who've been calling. It's working. We're getting new affiliates. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.